So today I'm going to present a pitch deck for a ecotourism, sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism, community-based tourism, I guess you can call it, a combination of all of those things. Not sure what category is the best fit for it because depending on who you ask, they all mean different things. These phrases, these definitions can intersect, but it gives you an idea of what we are working towards. So this is a pitch deck. It's actually what I'm using as a case study is a project that I am working on. This is not the exact details of the project, but it's kind of in the ballpark. And of course, as I'm able to share more about it, I will definitely share, what's going on with it. So the project is a eco-tourism, sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism. I want to say it's community-centered, and communities will drive the process with an emphasis on climate change resiliency and economic resiliency. And this is really communities, we're calling them frontline communities in the shadows of tourism and resource extraction. And so think about like your small island, what do they call it? Small island nation, small island developing states. I think that's the official title with the United Nations. And you're really not only these island states that attract tourists, like Jamaica, where I said my family's from, like the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is not considered vulnerable, I guess, because that access to U.S. It is vulnerable from a climate change perspective, but economically they have access to U.S. resources, in theory, right? And Puerto Rico, I guess, falls under the same boat, right? Falls under the same definition as vulnerable, but with access to U.S. resources, because I know there are folks in our network that do community development in Puerto Rico, and they're based in the U.S. And there's federal funding allocated. Yeah, there's plenty of work being done. Actually, because Region 1 in New York for federal funding includes Puerto Rico, at least for HUD, I believe, or that was the case years ago. And so really this is about how climate change adaptation isn't happening fast enough, and that small island states are extremely vulnerable to economic loss due to the warming of the seas and the warming of the atmosphere. And the other issue is over-tourism. And often, as the National Geographic pointed out last year in 2023, as visitors and rental properties outnumber local residents, communities are being lost. And this causes sort of like gentrification locally. It's happening in a lot of these tourist destinations, throughout the world. So it's something that needs to be addressed. And the global tourism industry is a $10 trillion industry, but there's a caveat with that, and I'll get to that later on in this presentation. But it's a $10 trillion industry, and that was the case in 2023. It represents over 9% of the global GDP. So this is a massive industry, and I feel like with all of what needs to, with all of the revenue that's generated, why are developing nations that are popular destinations for tourists, why are the communities in these areas struggling? And this has been the case my entire life, traveling to Jamaica, but it's gotten worse in recent years. And I'll talk about that in another video. But the level of poverty and the breakdown of just the lack of access to environment to places of respite, and access to the beach has been cut off. And I know a number of communities globally complain about that, and that's what I've experienced over time. And you know, it's a challenge. It's an issue. In fact, we visit Jamaica and stay for weeks at a time, and it's such a big difference in kind of like the hills and the mountainous areas where you have the ocean on kind of like one side and the mountains up ahead, and you can drive down the coastline and see the beach. You know, so you drive all the way down from when we drive up from Kingston towards like Port Antonio, towards the area where my family settled. My great grandfather settled, and my great grandma, coming from Cuba, migrated to Jamaica, and they settled in St. Mary's. And it's still very beautiful, but development is coming, and it's something that the community wants to be a part of development and economic opportunity, and the tourism that usually goes to places like Montego Bay, which is very popular. Before, our area wasn't even on the map. Port Antonio maybe rang a bell, but like Portland Parish, St. Mary's is kind of, because of Bob Marley, people kind of talked about it, but it's definitely becoming more and more of a tourist attraction, and going towards like Boston Beach and all of that, which has been up and coming for quite a while, but it's kind of spreading throughout, and areas that are very mountainous, like in the mountainous rainforest where my family's from. It's just breathtaking in terms of views and calm and peace and all of that, but it's rapidly changing. And you know, to what extent will the community have a role, have leadership, and to what extent will the change be participatory, right? I guess that's the question. And if history tells us, if we don't do anything to really ensure that communities have input, then they probably will be left out and be passive. Passive communities are dealing with overtourism, resource extraction, and climate change, and all of that is impacting many island communities, and some used to be very touristy. Haiti, in fact, believe it or not, was a tourist destination. People I knew growing up that weren't Haitian would travel to Haiti for tourism, and I know a few people who actually, up until maybe the last year or two, maybe last 2 years, we're still traveling there, even though things were starting to get, you know, a little bit complicated. But you know, it's beautiful place, and you know, Haiti has resources, minerals, and so does Jamaica. Has bauxite, which was sold or somehow ended up, the majority of it ended up in the hands of the Reynolds company that makes aluminum foil. Bauxite, I believe, is used to make aluminum foil. In the comments, if you know for sure, let me know. But I think that's what it is. I'll do more research on that. And then, you know, the idea is to move through this project, this People in Place Resiliency project, to move folks from passive communities living in the shadows of tourism to resilient and also engaged and active in the decisions made around tourism and planning and development and so on. And so this is community-centered economic development, community-curated travel experiences. So what communities know about how tourism works best for an area. So where over-tourism may be putting a strain on local resources, on infrastructure, communities would have knowledge about that. What happens after peak season, you know, in terms of water, fresh water, in terms of the ecology and flora and fauna. What happens during peak season in terms of access to beaches. I met a man, and we were in the grill, and there was a artist there who we bought something from, and he was just talking about how the beach was being, a lot of the beaches in Jamaica were being dredged and also being cut off from the community, and they had to. The costs were just too high for the community to really enjoy it. And there are places where where local residents can visit the beach for free or at a discounted cost, but there are a number of, it's just, people should have full access to the natural resources where they live. And so this is also about equitable, adaptive design practices that allows for tourism, but also, and the dollars that it brings, but also lessening dependence on tourism, and ensuring that communities also get to enjoy the place, the beauty, and the beauty and the ecosystem in which they live. And so there is a paradigm shift happening. Communities are taking action, and also tourists, when surveyed, have said that they are willing to do their part. And so this one survey by booking.com said that 64% of people would be okay with staying away from busy tourist sites to avoid adding to congestion, which is great. But the other challenge is the on the one hand, people wanting these unique, exclusive experiences. They're venturing into less traveled spaces that are also presenting challenges for the local community. So I know this has come up with like the Himalayas and various mountainous areas that people want to hike, and they want to go off the beaten path and do what other folks haven't done before and put it on Instagram, all of that. But when we visit these places and make these plans, we want to make sure that we are adding to, and I guess that's what regenerative tourism is about, not just taking from and enjoying or throwing an extra tip for the folks who are hosting you, but how do you leave that place better off? How do you add to the economic and ecological restoration and build and empower the people there while you enjoy the space? And that may also mean staying away and contributing from afar. And I think if there are places that we love that have been a place of healing and respite and enjoyment for us, then we owe it to that place and its people to contribute to its preservation and contribute to the experiences and the improved quality of life for the local community. Yeah, so this is about reimagining tourism, connection and stewardship of the places we travel to and the people and ecosystems that host us. So what do we do? This is about equitable access to the tourism economy. It's also ecosystem services. It's community development, which for those of you who know me know that I've done that work here and other places around the globe, well, primarily in the Caribbean and Africa and here in the US. So we support local communities in addressing barriers to full participation in the local economy while emphasizing the role that regenerative and adaptive design practices can play in long-term resiliency. And we do that through PAR, participatory action, research and analysis, which is about communities coming up with areas of concern that they want to explore further. So they have an idea about ecological degradation. They have an idea about the social and economic implications of what's going on as far as climate change and tourism and so on, but they want to do a deeper dive and they decide what that research looks like. So this is moving away from a more academic approach, which when we study on people and we come up with the questions and then we just observe people and study on people, as opposed to having the people themselves, the community, design their own research and conduct the research, be compensated to do that work because it can be time consuming, and to be engaged in the analysis and the interpretation of what it all means. And one really important tool is, a few tools are visual data can be really helpful, really useful. So projects like Photo Voice have been helpful in my work around PAR, and mapping, contextual mapping. And then there's skills training that we're doing licensing where possible. So what special licenses or certifications or designations do local communities, local hosts may need to really improve their access to the economy, access to markets, and access to non-extractive and non-exploitive capital and financial services. So I'm not going to mention any, well, I guess I kind of do mention them in the next slide, but I'm not saying that there are organizations that have been accused of practices, and I'm not saying that they are all true, what they've been accused of, but I'm saying that we want to make sure that we don't do that, that the practices are value added and don't add a financial burden to the community. So if they want to access microloans, for instance, that there's not some exorbitant interest rate, and that there's not, and that as much as possible the financial services are, there's transparency around them. And I know with the fintech industry and its interest in the interest of some social entrepreneurs doing fintech innovation around fintech financial technology, there's an interest in that transparency. So there are some options out there that we will be connecting to. And so just to break down some of the levers of change and what makes this different than other kind of ecotourism, community-based, kinds of travel experiences. So where you have Airbnb, which is great for communities who wouldn't otherwise be able to host. It's very corporate driven. The corporate driven company, so they make loads of money, they take fees. But the communities do have access, and I know a number of people who personally benefited from Airbnb, so we're not gonna, not speaking ill of them. And I use Airbnb, and it's been very helpful for me in traveling. But this is different than that. This is more community-centered, corporate, cooperative-driven. So looking at hosting holistically. And so if you own a space, if you own a Airbnb listing in an area, it might be looking at the impact of hosting on the community as a whole and how everyone can benefit, so that destination becomes even more attractive and dynamic and can be enjoyed year round, not only by tourists but by the community. And this is also about, again, tourism is great, but we can't depend on it we can't depend on one industry, right? Especially with climate change and at the pandemic, which can abruptly cut people off from the tourism industry, and tourist activity. So we need a diverse way of kind of diversify needs to diversify the industry a bit, as far as communities are concerned. And I think cooperative approaches, I know that cooperative approaches are being employed by communities, and they seem to work and kind of are important to resiliency. There's like under canvas glamping, and so glamorous camping experiences, which is very low impact, which is really great. But as far as I understand it, it's very individualistic hosting and traveling. And again, we want something more community centered. So we're looking at community owned and cooperative driven rather than individualistic hosting and traveling and corporate driven models. And then we have community led impact and kind of Western, US and Europe based corporate centered services. So we have Charity Water, which does great work. Kiva does great work, but we're really looking at a decentralized, community supported and locally community led impact. Of course, people will say, well, there's efficiency, there's economies of scale, there's a reason why things have to be centralized. But we know that if if the local community does not control, the process and systems, if it's not democratically run, then, it's people are just passive and they are, just kind of at the mercy of the whims of these foundations, these companies. And if they change their business model, like change how much they give or when they give, and interest rates on their micro loans and so on, then the community just has to deal with it. And we're saying it's okay to use and have access to, these NGOs, corporate Western-based NGOs. That's fine, but sorry about the noise. I often have to apologize for that since I am here in Brooklyn on a busy street. It's busy during the day. It's not so bad in the evening or in the weekends, but occasionally we get a truck or emergency vehicles. But anyway, so yeah, we want the community to have, again, diverse options. So yes, charity water, yes, tequila if the interest rates are not high, and if it's manageable, fine. But in addition to that, you have as backup your locally centered, locally led, cooperative model that you also have access to for financial services. And so the revenue model for this includes accommodation fees. So yes, we still host tourists, although we are tapping into the tourist industry, but we want to make sure we're not so dependent on it. So whatever investments, whatever revenue is generated, or that some of the revenue generated from hosting is reinvested into diversifying the local economy and reinvesting into the ecosystem to build environmental resiliency and adaptation and access to emergency preparedness resources. And also a blended patient capital model that looks at acquiring 0% interest line of credit. And I'm working on a project where we were able to access that here in the US, and I believe it's possible through USAID, depending on the country, or pooling patient capital from donors that will get their money back, but they're not expecting a return, so they're just kind of helping out the project, but they know they'll get the money back. Or, well, there's always a risk because it is an investment, it is a loan, but the key is to do everything possible to make sure that the project is viable and is generating revenue. And and then as far as the cost structure, we're looking at incremental investments in ecological restoration, community-based research, because we do want to pay folks, and the analysis and so on. And then there's training, and then there's tech services and digitization services. So with the aim of enhancing efficiency in operations, access to markets, and creating virtual experiences. So people who may have visited, let's say, the Jerk Center at Boston Beach can stay connected to some of the chefs there virtually through various services, maybe cooking classes or some other kind of special premium engagement that's done online where, it doesn't involve brick and mortar. And then, of course, digitization would also help with connectivity during emergencies and access to emergency alert systems. And so, yeah, I've talked a lot about how big the tourism industry, $10 trillion industry, over 9% of global GDP. It's an important, but it's an unreliable source of income of revenue for, especially for local communities, and local communities that are hosting or a part of the hospitality industry, for long-term economic resilience. And we saw that during the pandemic, where I know the folks that I'm working with in the Caribbean and Africa they struggled with this. This is mostly East Africa, Uganda, and Kenya and Tanzania. There was a struggle, but then people flocked. There were also some people who there was like a repatriation thing, especially in the Black community, to some of these places, which was also interesting. I'll get into that later because I think that's an opportunity as well. Well, not in this video, but at some point. And so, but yeah, Marriott has laid off 800 corporate employees recently. Expedia laid off a bunch of people earlier this year. And it is, yeah, you can't depend on one industry for your income. And we all do it all the time. Here in the West, we do. We have that one job, and we hope that it'll last forever. And recent political things happening, puts a lot of that into reality for us right now. So a lot of community development in these places has to center on, well, what else do you do? What else do you have to fall back on if tourism shuts down for some reason? Again, because it did happen prior. And so in terms of the team and competencies and affiliations, just the international development work that we've been doing, those in our network, construction trades affiliations, which will come in handy with training and workforce development, LEED certification, so understanding of sustainable building and design practices, the Kenyan Green Building Council, so our work in East Africa, and our network there, and affiliations with higher education institutes, which typically most universities have an international scope and focus. And as you know, I worked in higher ed for over 14 years. And local community leadership in host countries is really, really important. We cannot do this work without the local community. Participatory action research, folks who are experts in that area, and expertise in housing finance and economic development finance, which is really, really key, and understanding how some of this might work if we eventually are involved in leveraging the real estate there and wanting to develop something which can be complex. The school we have in Jamaica, it sits on real estate, and it's the real estate that was purchased and developed for that school, and it's a lot you gotta understand. So and Uganda, we helped a community purchase, they didn't purchase it, but they're renting land for agricultural cooperative, led by a young lady there, who is a fellow with the MasterCard Foundation. I mention her over and over again because she's amazing. I just want to leave us with this message by Diebedo Francis Kere, who I often reference in this sustainable development community-centered work. He's an architect that works with local communities to design spaces that they need. And this here on your left is a image of a school that he helped design, and the community built it. So because of the limited resources, and this is in West Africa, I believe in Burkina Faso. His work is everywhere. He just won a big prize, I believe last year, the leading architecture prize, either this year or last year, for his work, which is well deserved. I got to meet him and first learned about his work about 15 years ago at Columbia University. I was doing a project there with the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, and they hosted him. They hosted all of these like innovators in planning and architecture from around the world, and his presentation just blew me away. And ever since then, I've been kind of following his work. And maybe I'll do another video because it's very inspiring, and it's what I hope to bring, the energy I hope to see in this project. But it is a network. I'm sharing what I can share about it right now because we're in the very early stages of it, and it's work that's already being done. It's just we're kind of building a infrastructure around it. And speaking of which, I wanted to share just some of the traction to date. So across the network that I'm working with, we have 800 communities that are impacted or will be impacted in the coming year, with 17 entrepreneurs supported, 3 countries and 1 U.S. territory. And the goal for 2025 is to facilitate local host communities' access to technology and training in sustainable ecotourism, regenerative practices, and expand their access to markets. That's the main thing, as I mentioned in the earlier slide. So, as as the architect Kere says, everyone deserves quality, everyone deserves luxury, and everyone deserves comfort. And you have his picture on the left. And on the right, this is a picture of a protest in Spain. As some of you may know, the communities in Spain, I believe it was Barcelona, if it's not Barcelona, I forgot where, Madrid, well, one of the major cities where people were protesting tourism and just, gentrification, being cut off from the spaces that were important to them, where they go to rest, where the local community goes to rest, and where, and just impacts, it lowers the local quality of life, especially if most people are unable to benefit from tourism economically. And then their quality of life is diminished, and things become more expensive. We have to, yes, it's up to local governments. I've seen comments on social media about this, and people have said, well, it's not the tourist's fault, it's the local government's fault. Yeah, that's true. But if you're a tourist and you care about these spaces and you love being there, you love the place in part because of the people and because of the culture. And you can honor those people and their culture by listening and by seeing what you could do your part. Just don't, say, well, let the other guy do it. I'm just going to sip my coffee in the cafe, because in some places like here in Spain, they're going to come and throw water on you when you're eating your food. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, because I know in Jamaica they've been very, let's say in certain instances where the folks that feel disrespected, they've been very vocal and actively pushing against it, very actively and aggressively pushing against disrespect. So no one wants to be disrespected, in their home, in their neighborhood. Everyone deserves to have access to the beauty and everyone deserves to have access to their community, and yes, local government has to play their role, but if you enjoy the space, let's also do our part. Let's be good stewards of places that we love and enjoy and travel to. So that is this pitch deck. It gives you an idea. I did an earlier video about 2 years ago on how to create a nonprofit pitch deck. This is like a social venture, nonprofit-ish kind of, I would say more like a social venture. And so it's less techy and it's small scale. It's because it's the idea is to really have community drive the process. So there's a lot here that's not set in stone, that's not fully developed because the community hasn't developed it. But I'm just sharing what some of the bare bones concepts have been coming out of the work we've been doing internationally, and how we plan to present it to possible partners. So if you want to learn more, drop a comment. You can also visit our website at ILEstrategies.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Anasa Scott-Laude, and I'll put my information in the comments so you can learn more and stay posted. So let me know if you have any questions, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Like, subscribe, and comment for regenerative tourism. No, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.